Have you ever been walking down, just a regular city street, maybe right after a heavy rainstorm, and you notice this strange, tall, white, shaggy-looking mushroom popping up out of nowhere?
Oh, I love finding those.
Right, like maybe you spot it sitting quietly on a manicured lawn or clustered on a gravel path and this is the scenario that always just stops me in my tracks. You see it literally shoving its way upward through solid, human-poured asphalt.
Yeah, it creates this really striking visual contradiction because you're looking at a seemingly delicate, fluffy white cylinder, and it is just surrounded by shattered concrete
It's wild.
or upheaved blacktop, right? Looking for all the world, like it just detonated its way to the surface from the underground.
It really does look like a miniature explosion site. I mean, visually, it's incredibly distinct. It looks like a tall, narrow bell covered in these peeling, fluffy white scales with brownish or tan tips.
Which is exactly where it gets its nicknames.
Exactly, yeah. That layered, curled look is why a lot of foragers actually call it the lawyer's wig, because it bears a really striking resemblance to one of those ornate powdered wigs you see judges wearing in old British courtrooms.
It really does.
But today, we are taking you on a custom-tailored deep dive into the bizarre, paradoxical, and honestly just mind-blowing world of this specific organism. Scientifically, it's known as Coprinus comatus, but most of the time you'll just hear it called the shaggy mane.
And we're pulling together an incredibly diverse spectrum of information to unpack this today. I mean, we're looking at everything from wild culinary recipes and historical foraging manuals on one end of the spectrum.
The fun stuff.
Right, all the way to highly technical metagenomic sequencing data analyzed from the extreme high-altitude deserts of the Kaidam Basin in China. And we're also diving into laboratory data detailing heavy metal bioaccumulation and soil remediation.
Yeah, we really have to cover that massive spectrum because our mission today is to figure out how a mushroom that literally digests its own body into a puddle of dripping black goo is somehow, simultaneously, a carnivorous predator.
Which is still hard to wrap my head around.
I know. And we are going to explore how it's an elite, highly sought-after culinary delicacy, a master manipulator of microscopic soil bacteria, and potentially a biological savior for the Earth's most chemically polluted landscapes.
The overarching theme you'll notice as we go through this is, well, biological shapeshifting. I mean, this organism just constantly defies the basic assumptions we make about fungi.
So let's start right there with that shape-shifting, rule-breaking aspect, specifically regarding its raw physical power. Because if you are out trying to identify a shaggy mane, you look for that cylindrical white cap and the fluffy scales.
Right, and you generally find them in highly disturbed areas. They love manicured lawns, hard-packed dirt trails, the compacted soil you find around new construction sites.
But there is a strict rule for identification here, right? Like, you will never, ever see a shaggy mane growing directly out of a piece of wood or a rotting log.
Exactly, never. It is strictly a ground dweller.
Okay, and that ground-dwelling nature is what brings me back to the asphalt thing. I have to push back a little on the physics of this situation.
Okay, let's hear it.
I mean, I know a mushroom is essentially a network of microscopic threads,
Yes.
right? And the fruiting body, the part we actually see above ground, is mostly water. It's soft tissue. I can crush it between my fingers.
Sure.
So how does something inherently soft and waterlogged shatter human-made concrete and asphalt? Mentally, I picture trying to break a brick wall by pushing a water balloon against it. The balloon should always break first.
That makes intuitive sense, but the mechanism overriding your water balloon analogy is a biological phenomenon called turgor pressure.
Turgor pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to understand how the mushroom breaks the asphalt, you have to look at what the mycelium, the underground network, is actually doing in the hours before the mushroom appears.
Getting ready to strike.
Sort of, yeah. As the growing fruiting body, the sporocarp, begins to form, it aggressively draws moisture from the surrounding soil and the humid air following a rainstorm.
Wait, so it's actively pumping water into itself, like inflating it higher.
In a highly structured way, yes. It transports that moisture and packs it tightly into its own cellular structure. And because water is it's largely incompressible fluid, packing it into the rigid confines of the fungal cell walls builds up massive internal hydraulic force.
Oh, wow.
So the fungus isn't striking the concrete like a hammer. It is operating like a slow-motion hydraulic jack.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. A hydraulic press uses fluid to crush steel, so the mushroom is just using internal cellular fluid to push upward.
Precisely. The sheer relentless upward force generated by millions of microscopic cells expanding with incompressible water is just staggering. The expanding cap finds these microscopic fissures and weaknesses in the asphalt above it.
And it just exploits them.
Right. It presses into those fissures, and as the turgor pressure continues to build, the hydraulic force exceeds the tensile strength of the asphalt, causing the solid barrier to just heave and shatter.
I'm never going to look at a fragile little lawn mushroom the same way again. I mean, it's applying sheer hydraulic engineering to conquer a parking lot.
It really is.
But that raw physical power isn't the only aggressive trait the shaggy mane possesses. When I was looking into its biological classification, I found a detail that forced me to literally stop and reread the page. The Coprinus comatus is classified as nematophagous.
Yeah. It acts as a carnivorous organism in the soil.
A carnivorous lawn ornament. Which, I mean, I know the basics of mycology. I know that most mushrooms are saprotrophs. Like, they secrete enzymes to break down dead organic matter, fallen leaves, dead roots, and absorb the nutrients.
That's the standard fungal lifestyle, yes.
And I assume the shaggy mane does that too, right?
It functions primarily as the saprotroph, yes. But, well, we have to remember the fundamental limitation of all fungi. They lack chlorophyll.
Right, so they can't photosynthesize.
Exactly. They cannot photosynthesize sunlight to create their own food energy the way plants do. So every nutrient they need, particularly nitrogen, which is absolutely essential for protein synthesis and growth, it must be extracted from their immediate environment.
And in highly disturbed or nutrient-poor soils, simple decay sometimes just doesn't provide enough nitrogen, right?
Precisely.
So the shaggy mane evolved a way to actively hunt for protein to make up the difference. That's so creepy.
And at a microscopic level, the hunting is quite vicious, actually. The underground mycelial network doesn't just passively wait for dead material to fall on it. The soil is, teeming with microscopic life, including tiny unsegmented roundworms called nematodes.
Okay, so how does a stationary fungus catch a worm?
Well, the shaggy mane has developed these specialized structures on its mycelium. When a nematode worm navigates through the microscopic water films in the soil and just brushes against these fungal threads, the fungus reacts.
It sets a trap.
It secretes specialized, highly targeted digestive enzymes and paralyzing toxins directly onto the worm.
Oh my God.
Yeah, the nematode is rapidly immobilized. And once the worm is paralyzed, the fungal threads actually invade the body of the nematode, killing it and digesting its internal structures right there in the dirt.
That is brutal.
And then the fungus just absorbs the nitrogen-rich nutrients from the worm's dissolved body. It is a distinctly predatory adaptation for a mushroom you might just find growing next to your mailbox.
Yeah, note to self, never get shrunk down to the size of a nematode. But, that predatory behavior is totally invisible to us. What happens at the end of the shaggy mane's life cycle is very visible, and it's honestly the trait this mushroom is most famous for. In the biological data, it's referred to as autodeliquescence, the melting act.
This is the defining characteristic of the entire Coprinus genus, actually. It's why they are colloquially known as the inky caps. Within hours of the mushroom reaching maturity, or even over the hours of a forager plucking it from the ground, the organism initiates this rapid, systemic process of self-digestion.
The crisp white cap literally melts into a dripping, black, inky liquid.
It does.
The speed of it is what blows my mind. Like, you can find a perfect, pristine, white cylinder, pick it, put it in your basket, and by the time you get home, you're holding a bare stem with a puddle of black goo attached to the top.
It's a very frustrating surprise for new foragers.
I bet. I really want to dig into the biochemistry of this, though. Why does a living structure suddenly liquefy?
So the structural collapse is driven by a highly specific enzymatic reaction. As the mushroom matures, it begins to synthesize and release an enzyme called chitinase. And the target of this enzyme is a molecule called chitin.
Wait, chitin? Isn't that the structural foundation of the mushroom? Because I know chitin is the exact same long-chain polymer that, insects and spiders and crabs use to build their hard exoskeletons. Fungi use it instead of the cellulose that plants use, right?
That structural similarity is key, yes.
Yeah.
Chitin provides the rigid scaffolding for the fungal cell walls. It's what allows the mushroom to hold its shape and push through the asphalt like we talked about.
Yeah.
But the chitinase enzyme is chemically designed to seek out and break the specific chemical bonds holding that chitin polymer together. So, in the final mature stage of its life, the shaggy mane floods its own gills and cap tissue with chitinase.
So it is intentionally dissolving its own skeleton.
Systematically. The enzyme degrades the structural scaffolding starting at the bottom edge of the cylindrical cap and works its way upwards.
So it melts from the bottom up.
Exactly. And as the cell walls collapse, the intracellular water is released, mixing with the dark spores to create that characteristic black ink.
Okay, the obvious question here is why? I mean, evolution generally favors organisms that try to stay alive and intact as long as possible. Why would a species evolve a mechanism for total structural self-destruction?
We have to view this through the lens of fungal reproduction. The singular ultimate goal of that fruiting body popping out of the ground is to release its spores into the environment to propagate the species.
Right, the mushroom is just the apple on the tree.
Exactly. Now, the vast majority of mushrooms rely on wind dispersal. They open up like umbrellas and let the breeze carry the spores away from their gills. But the physical shape of the shaggy mane presents a major obstacle to that strategy.
Because it doesn't look like an umbrella, it looks like a tightly closed bell.
Yes.
And the gills underneath are packed incredibly tightly together. The life cycle descriptions note that the gills start out pure white, then they turn a pinkish color as they mature, and finally turn black as the spores develop. But those gills are wedged so closely together that the wind literally can't get in between them.
The spores are essentially trapped inside the cylinder. Standard aerodynamic dispersal just fails here. So the autodeliquescence is a radical solution to a geometric problem.
Wow.
By melting from the bottom up, the cap effectively unfurls itself. As the lower tissue turns to liquid and drips away, it physically removes the structural mass that was blocking the gills above it. It continuously peels back its own layers, exposing fresh, spore-laden surface area to the air currents.
So it is destroying the house just to get the furniture out. It sacrifices its own body to ensure the spores have a clear path to the wind.
It does. And there is a brilliant secondary dispersal mechanism tied directly to the melting process.
Oh.
Yeah, as the tissue liquefies and digests itself, the chemical breakdown produces organic compounds that emanate a very distinct odor. To human senses, it smells foul, somewhat like rotting fish or decaying flesh.
Ugh. Which doesn't sound appetizing for us, but in the wild, a rotting flesh smell is basically a dinner bell for a whole different set of creatures.
Exactly the intended audience. Specific species of flies and beetles are highly attracted to the smell of carrion and rot. They detect the odor of the deliquescing mushroom, they land on the dripping black goo, and they begin to feed.
And while they're eating.
In the process, their legs and bodies become coated in the sticky, spore-rich black ink. When they fly away, they act as biological vectors, carrying the shaggy mane's spores over vast distances, far beyond where the wind could take them.
That is just phenomenal ecological engineering. It uses chemical warfare against its own rigid skeleton to solve a geometric problem, exposes its spores to the wind, and simultaneously brews up a stinky biological attractant to trick bugs into operating as a free taxi service for the rest of the spores.
The efficiency of the design is really remarkable, leaving almost nothing behind once its reproductive mission is complete.
But okay, that genius evolutionary trick, melting itself to spread spores, creates an absolute nightmare if you are a human being who actually wants to put this thing on a dinner plate.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the second you pick it, that biological countdown clock starts ticking.
The race against time is the defining feature of foraging the shaggy mane.
Right. If you look at standard foraging guides, the shaggy mane is universally praised. It is considered one of the foolproof 4 for beginners. It's incredibly easy to identify, and unlike a lot of white mushrooms, it has no deadly, toxic lookalikes. You aren't going to accidentally kill yourself by misidentifying it.
Which is great for beginners.
But the catch is the shelf life. It is virtually non-existent. You have a window of maybe 2 to 4 hours from the moment you pluck it out of the lawn to the moment it needs to be hitting a hot frying pan.
Right, because the autodeliquescence isn't just triggered by age. It is heavily exacerbated by physical trauma. Deliquescence will naturally begin within an hour or two at room temperature.
Okay.
But if you harvest a shaggy mane and toss it carelessly into a standard foraging bag where it gets... So the methodology of collection has to be meticulous. To prevent the crushing issue, experienced foragers utilize wide, shallow, flat-bottom baskets. This ensures the mushrooms lay flat in a single layer, rather than stacking on top of each other and inducing mechanical stress.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, you want to cleanly slice off the dirty, soil-covered base of the stem while you are still standing in the field.
Right, because if you bring a dirty mushroom into the kitchen, your first instinct is to run it under the faucet to wash the dirt off. And the guides are absolutely adamant, do not let these mushrooms anywhere near a running tap.
Never.
They already possess a massive internal water content, which we know from the concrete breaking turgor pressure, and holding them under running water just turns the delicate flesh into unappetizing mush. You have to clean them dry, gently brushing the caps with a paper towel or a soft pastry brush.
But if immediate cooking isn't an option, there is a fascinating biochemical hack that foragers use to artificially delay the melting process. It's often referred to as the water trick.
The water trick, I was reading about this.
Yeah, the forager takes the intact mushrooms, submerges them completely in a jar of cold water, seals it, and places it in the refrigerator.
See, I found this totally counterintuitive at first. The rule is don't wash them in water because it ruins them. But the preservation hack is drown them completely in a jar of water. How does that make any sense?
The key to the paradox lies in the biochemistry of the chitinase enzyme. Deliquescence, that active enzymatic breakdown of the structural chitin, is an aerobic process. It absolutely requires the presence of oxygen to proceed.
Oh, so when you completely immerse the mushroom in cold water, you effectively cut off its access to atmospheric oxygen.
You are suffocating the enzyme.
Precisely.
The lack of oxygen stalls the enzymatic reaction, and the cold temperature of the refrigerator further slows the metabolic processes. This oxygen deprivation technique can buy a forager up to 48 hours of freshness, though the water must be drained and replaced every 12 hours to maintain the effect.
That is so clever. And if you don't want to mess with jars of water, there is a more permanent physical intervention. Right, you can blanch them.
Yes, you can.
You drop the freshly picked mushrooms into rapidly boiling water for just 15 to 20 seconds. The sudden exposure to extreme thermal energy physically denatures the chitinase enzyme. It destroys the molecular shape of the enzyme, rendering it permanently inert and halting the melting process for good.
It's a race to deactivate the chemistry before the chemistry deactivates the mushroom.
So let's assume you beat the clock. You get them into the kitchen intact, either by sprinting home or using the oxygen deprivation trick. The culinary profile of the Shaggy mane is supposedly fantastic.
It is highly regarded.
The flesh has a very delicate, creamy texture. A lot of chefs compare the mouthfeel to tender, flaky white fish. And the flavor is a mild, earthy umami. The recommended preparation is gentle. You pan-fry them slowly in butter over medium-low heat.
Right, because of that massive internal water content we discussed, they will shrink rapidly and release a lot of liquid into the pan. They require a very delicate touch. Aggressive stirring will cause the soft tissue to simply disintegrate into the butter.
Oh, I hate when that happens. Some people also bread the younger, tighter button mushrooms and throw them in an air fryer for a crispy, earthy snack, or puree them down into rich cream soups. But let's look at the worst-case scenario. Let's say you failed the race.
It happens to the best of us.
You left them sitting on the kitchen counter, you got distracted by a phone call, and you walk back in to find a puddle of black, dripping goo on your cutting board. Is the harvest ruined?
Surprisingly, the culinary answer is no.
The black ink itself is completely edible.
It is. But this requires a vital distinction between types of organic breakdown. When you leave a tomato or a peach on your counter and it turns into mush, that is bacterial or fungal rot. External microorganisms are invading the tissue, consuming it, and leaving behind toxic waste products. It is spoiled and unsafe to eat.
Okay.
When the Shaggy mane turns to black ink on your counter, it is not rotting. It is undergoing an internal, sterile enzymatic breakdown.
So the tissue is just shifting from a solid state to a liquid state.
Assuming the mushroom was harvested fresh and clean, the ink is simply liquefied mushroom flesh and spores. It is not spoiled in a bacterial sense.
That is a wild mental hurdle to jump, eating black slime. But people actively utilize it? I was looking at a recipe specifically designed to harness this process called black mushroom pasta.
Yes, that's a famous one.
You don't even try to beat the clock. You intentionally take 6 large, fresh, shaggy manes, put them in a glass bowl, cover them, and just let them sit at room temperature for 24 to 48 hours until they completely liquefy.
You're literally harnessing the autodeliquescence for culinary purposes.
Exactly. And once they melt, you strain the black ink through a fine mesh to remove any remaining grit or fibrous stem pieces. Then, you take that pure jet black liquid and mix it with 3 cups of durum wheat flour, 2 fresh eggs, a pinch of salt, and a drizzle of olive oil.
And it's a beautiful dough.
Yeah, you knead the liquid mushroom directly into the flour to create a dramatic, jet black dough for linguine or fettuccine.
And the ink serves a dual purpose there. It provides a striking visual presentation, akin to squid ink pasta, but it also infuses the dough with a highly concentrated, earthy, umami mushroom flavor.
That sounds amazing.
It is. Creative foragers also take the strained ink and whip it into softened butter with garlic and herbs, creating a visually striking compound butter to melt over steaks.
Okay, and if you don't want to eat it, you can literally write with it. George Washington reportedly used liquefied Shaggy manes as actual writing ink during his time.
The physical properties of the liquid make it quite suitable for that historical application, actually. The millions of microscopic dark spores suspended in the liquid provide a dense, stable pigment that flows well from a quill and dries permanently on parchment.
Okay, so we've established they are delicious and versatile, but we absolutely have to talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to the Coprinus genus.
Ah, yes, the alcohol warning.
Right. If you pick up almost any old-school foraging guide or talk to amateur mushroom hunters, you will inevitably hear a terrifying warning. Never eat inky cap mushrooms while drinking a beer, or it will violently poison you. What is the actual deal with this alcohol myth?
To understand the myth, we have to carefully untangle a long-standing case of taxonomic mistaken identity. The warning itself is very real, and the danger is very real, but it is routinely applied to the wrong mushroom.
Okay, clarify that for us.
Within the inky cap family, there is a closely related species called Coprinopsis atramentaria. Its common names are the common inky cap, or appropriately, the alcohol inky.
And it looks similar to our subject today, the shaggy mane, Coprinus comatus. They both pop up in lawns, and they both melt into black ink.
Visually and behaviorally, they are very close cousins, but biochemically, they are vastly different organisms. The shaggy mane, Coprinus comatus, is perfectly safe to consume alongside a glass of wine or a beer. It contains no reactive toxins.
Good to know.
The common inky cap, however, synthesizes a fascinating and highly potent chemical compound called Coprine.
Let's deep dive into the chemistry of Coprine, because mapping out exactly how this chemical attacks the human body is fascinating. What happens when someone eats the common inky cap and then decides to have a drink?
Well, when you ingest the flesh of the common inky cap, your digestive system breaks down the mushroom, and your body metabolizes the Coprine compound into two distinct components. One is glutamic acid, which is harmless.
Okay, and the second?
And a specialized compound called aminocyclopropanol. This aminocyclopropanol is the biochemical saboteur. Its specific function is to actively interfere with human alcohol metabolism by targeting and inhibiting a vital enzyme in your liver called aldehyde dehydrogenase.
Okay, let's trace that biological assembly line to understand why blocking that specific enzyme is so disastrous. Let's look at the normal, healthy path of a beer through the human body.
Sure.
When you take a drink, you are ingesting ethanol. Your liver goes to work on that ethanol, and the first step is breaking it down into a substance called acetaldehyde. And acetaldehyde is highly toxic, right? It's largely what makes you feel terrible when you drink too much.
Acetaldehyde is highly toxic and a known carcinogen. Your body recognizes it as a dangerous poison. So in a normal scenario, the liver immediately deploys the enzyme we just mentioned, aldehyde dehydrogenase.
Right.
This enzyme acts upon the toxic acetaldehyde, rapidly breaking it down into a harmless substance called acetate. The acetate is then easily flushed out of your system.
So it's a two-step assembly line. Ethanol gets converted into toxic acetaldehyde, and then the enzyme immediately converts the toxic acetaldehyde into harmless acetate, clean and efficient.
Under normal conditions, yes. But if you have eaten the common inky cap, the aminocyclopropanol from the mushroom is circulating in your system. This compound binds to the aldehyde dehydrogenase enzyme and physically blocks it from functioning.
Oh, wow.
It throws a wrench into the second step of the assembly line.
So the assembly line stops right in the middle.
Exactly. You drink the beer. Your liver performs step one, converting the ethanol into the highly toxic acetaldehyde. But because the necessary enzyme is blocked by the mushroom compound, step two never happens. The liver cannot convert the poison into harmless acetate.
Which means the toxic acetaldehyde has nowhere to go. It just starts rapidly backing up and accumulating in your bloodstream.
And the physiological consequences of that toxic buildup are severe and immediate. The person will experience a violently flushed, red face and neck, a rapidly racing heart rate, a throbbing headache, intense nausea, and severe vomiting.
Well, that sounds awful. It essentially weaponizes the alcohol, instantly giving you the worst physiological symptoms of a severe hangover while you are still drinking your first beer.
It is a profound negative physiological response. In modern medicine, there is actually a pharmaceutical drug called disulfiram, sold under the brand name Antabuse, which is prescribed to recovering alcoholics.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, Antabuse functions on this exact same chemical pathway. It intentionally blocks aldehyde dehydrogenase to make the physical act of drinking alcohol unbearable, creating an extreme aversion therapy. The common inky cap evolved this identical biochemical mechanism naturally.
And what makes the mushrooms version even more insidious is how long the trap stays set.
Oh, definitely.
The inhibition of the enzyme isn't a brief window. If you eat the common inkcap, that aminocyclopropanol can keep your enzymes blocked for days. You could eat the mushrooms on a Monday, be totally fine, have a glass of wine on a Wednesday, and suddenly be hit with a violently racing heart and vomiting.
Yes, you can trigger the reaction if you consume alcohol up to 48, sometimes even 72 hours after eating the mushroom.
It is a staggering biochemical defense mechanism that just lingers in the human system. But I want to reiterate this with absolute clarity for anyone listening right now.
Please do.
The shaggy mane, Coprinus comatus, the fluffy white cylinder that breaks concrete and eats worms, does not contain coprine. It does not synthesize aminocyclopropanol. It will not block your liver enzymes. It is perfectly safe to eat with a beer. It just suffers from severe guilt by visual association with its toxic cousin.
It is purely a victim of taxonomic confusion among amateur foragers.
So we have thoroughly established that the shaggy mane is a powerhouse in the kitchen, a shapeshifter that dissolves its own skeleton, and a master of complex enzymatic chemistry. But the data we are looking at next takes a sudden, dramatic pivot away from the culinary world.
Yes, it does.
We move out of the kitchen and into one of the most extreme, inhospitable environments on the planet. Because it turns out, the shaggy mane isn't just reacting to its environment, it is a master ecological engineer actively terraforming the wild.
This shift in perspective requires us to look at the fungus not as a food source, but as a keystone species capable of profound environmental manipulation.
Right.
The metagenomic sequencing data brings us to the Qaidam Basin, located in Qinghai Province, China, high up on the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau.
I looked into the geography of the Qaidam Basin, and, inhospitable feels like an understatement. It sits at an altitude of nearly 2,700 meters. That's almost 9,000 feet above sea level.
It's extremely high up.
The climate is incredibly arid, experiencing severe drought conditions. But the real killer is the dirt itself. The soil is severely salinized, meaning it is packed with toxic levels of salt, and it is highly alkaline. It is a harsh, unforgiving wasteland where very few plants or organisms can even survive, let alone thrive.
The combination of high altitude, drought, high salinity, and alkalinity creates a uniquely stressful ecosystem.
Yet researchers identified two distinct macrofungi not just surviving but actually flourishing out there in the wasteland.
What were they?
They studied a rare, deep-growing fungus called Agaricus cynodelicious, referred to locally as Dafei gu, and our familiar shapeshifter, the shaggy mane, Coprinus comatus, known there as G-twigu. The core question the researchers asked was, how are these mushrooms surviving this toxic dirt? And more importantly, what are they doing to the dirt?
Exactly.
So they took core samples of the soil directly beneath the physical mushrooms and ran complete chemical profiles on them, comparing those results to empty, barren control soil just a few feet away.
And the comparative data reveals the sheer engineering power of the fungal mycelium.
I want to walk through the exact numbers from this metagenomic paper, focusing on the shaggy mane, because the surge in nutrients is staggering. We aren't looking at a 5% or 10% bump in soil quality here.
No, the numbers are much more dramatic.
Right. Compared to the dead control soil, the dirt directly beneath a shaggy mane saw total carbon go up by 113.24%. Total nitrogen increased by 108.06%. Hydrolyzable nitrogen, which is the nitrogen actually available for plants to use rather than being locked up, was up 97.90%.
Those are massive triple-digit spikes in the foundational macroscopic building blocks of life.
And it gets more extreme. Available phosphorus skyrocketed by 163.14%. And available potassium, this is the metric that absolutely blew my mind, increased by an astonishing 596.09%.
It's hard to even process that jump.
How on earth does a simple network of fungal threads conjure an almost 600% increase in potassium out of a barren, salty wasteland? It's operating like a microscopic, magical fertilizer factory.
It feels like magic, but it is a masterclass in biochemistry. The mycelial network of the shaggy mane isn't creating elements from nothing. It operates as an advanced underground chemical refinery, unlocking what is already there but inaccessible.
Okay, so how does it unlock them?
To achieve these numbers, the fungus secretes a complex cocktail of extracellular enzymes directly into the surrounding soil matrix.
When you say extracellular enzymes, you mean the fungus is essentially sweating out digestive juices into the dirt around it.
Precisely. It extrudes enzymes like celluloses, hemicellulases, and powerful ligninolytic enzymes such as lactases.
Let's break down those ligninolytic enzymes. Lignin is the incredibly tough, complex, organic polymer that makes wood and plant stems rigid and hard, right?
Yes, it is.
So the fungus is pumping out chemicals specifically designed to shatter the toughest organic armor in nature.
They act as microscopic chemical scissors. In a barren environment like the Kadam Basin, any organic matter that does exist is usually locked up in highly complex, rigid, undecomposed forms. The fungal enzymes physically slice through these complex molecules, breaking them down into soluble, low molecular weight carbon compounds.
So the fungus is liberating trapped resources, unlocking the halt.
Furthermore, the mycelium exudes specialized organic acids. In alkaline soils, phosphorus is often heavily mineralized and fixed into the dirt, meaning it is chemically bound in a way that plants and other life forms just cannot absorb it.
Oh, so it's there, but it's useless.
Exactly. The organic acids produced by the shaggy mane chemically interact with that fixed phosphorus, dissolving the bonds and converting it into a soluble, highly bioavailable form.
So the mushroom is forcibly unlocking the nutritional pantry for the entire immediate ecosystem. The ecological term for this is CNP coupling, right? Carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus.
Yes.
The fungus is actively tying all these vital nutrient cycles together, pulling them out of their locked states and making them available.
It is radically enhancing the bioavailability of the local environment. But perhaps the most crucial data point from the Kaidam Basin study regarding survival isn't about the fertilizer it added, but what it did with the toxic salt.
Right. The salinity of the basin is what usually kills everything. And the data showed something really paradoxical here. The total salt content in the soil under the shaggy mane actually increased slightly.
Counterintuitive, right?
Extremely.
Yeah.
However, the electrical conductivity, which is the scientific measure of free-floating, harmful, soluble salt ions that actively stress and kill plant life, dropped by a massive 99.67%.
That's a huge drop.
How does the fungus make the harmful electrical charge of the salt simply disappear from the readings while the salt itself is still technically there?
The researchers attribute this massive drop in conductivity to biological sequestration. In a highly salinized environment, the osmotic stress is lethal. The salt literally sucks the water out of the cells of plants and microbes.
Like curing meat.
Exactly. The fungal network of the shaggy mane combats this by actively absorbing those free-floating, harmful salt ions out of the soil moisture. Once absorbed, it physically incorporates the salt into its own massive fungal biomass.
It's eating the salt.
Or, more accurately, it is complexing those reactive salt ions with the newly produced organic carbon compounds we just discussed. It binds the toxic reactive salt ions to large organic molecules, essentially wrapping the dangerous salt in a stable, inert organic blanket.
Oh, I see. By wrapping up the salt ions, it neutralizes their electrical charge and removes them from the soil solution. It pulls the invisible danger out of the dirt and locks it away.
It neutralizes the intense osmotic stress, creating a localized safe zone where cellular life can function normally without being dehydrated by the salt.
That is an unbelievable survival mechanism. But the shaggy mane doesn't stop at altering the chemistry of the dirt. The sequencing data reveals that the mushroom actively reshapes the demographics of the microscopic population living in the soil.
Oh, this is fascinating.
It is essentially playing general, right? Manipulating vast armies of bacteria to serve its needs.
This brings us to the microbiome manipulation aspect of the metagenomic study. The researchers analyzed how the presence of the fungal mycelium fundamentally altered the diversity and dominance of bacterial phyla in the immediate area.
And the two mushrooms they studied took completely opposite tactical approaches to their bacterial neighbors. The deep-growing agaricus mushroom chose one strategy. It massively boosted the local population of a bacteria called Streptomyces. Why would a mushroom actively cultivate Streptomyces?
Streptomyces is a highly renowned genus in microbiology because it is a prolific producer of a vast array of natural antibiotics. By actively feeding and cultivating the Streptomyces population, the agaricus mushroom is essentially paying a mercenary army.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the bacteria release antibiotics into the surrounding soil, suppressing aggressive pathogenic bacteria and creating a safe, sterile, heavily defended microscopic bubble for the mushroom to grow in.
It builds a chemical moat of antibiotics around itself. That's smart. But our shaggy mane, Coprinus comatus, rejects that strategy entirely.
It does.
The data shows that the shaggy mane intentionally suppresses streptomyces. The presence of the mushroom and the bacteria are negatively correlated in the data. If the shaggy mane moves in, the antibiotic mercenaries are kicked out.
It doesn't want them there.
Right. Instead, the shaggy mane throws all its resources into massively boosting a different bacteria called Pseudomonas, elevating it to become the absolute dominant bacterial force in the soil.
This strategic choice raises a crucial ecological question. Why does the shaggy mane prefer to ally with Pseudomonas over the antibiotic protection of streptomyces in this specific extreme environment?
Exactly. Why fire the bodyguards to hire these guys? What does Pseudomonas bring to the table in a toxic desert?
Because Pseudomonas is the ultimate wasteland survivalist. This specific bacterial genus possesses highly efficient phosphate solubilizing capabilities. It acts as a force multiplier, complementing the mushroom's own acidic efforts to unlock fixed phosphorus from the alkaline dirt.
Okay, so it helps with the mining?
Right. Furthermore, many strains of Pseudomonas are capable of nitrogen fixation. They can pull inert nitrogen gas directly out of the atmosphere and convert it into a usable form in the soil.
It's importing fertilizer from the air?
Yes. But most importantly, for the Kaidam Basin, Pseudomonas possesses immense, specialized stress tolerance mechanisms for surviving extreme salt and alkaline conditions. Many strains produce thick exopolysaccharides,
Which are what, exactly?
essentially a protective slime. It shields them from the harsh osmotic pressure of the salt.
Okay, so synthesizing all of this. The shaggy mane isn't interested in hiding inside a sterile antibiotic bubble. It is actively cultivating a specialized, highly resilient bacterial army that thrives in the toxic salt, helps it unlock trapped minerals, and literally pulls nitrogen from the sky.
It is building a dynamic, aggressive alliance to conquer a harsh wasteland, not just hide from it.
It is the definition of niche construction at a microscopic level. The fungus and the Pseudomonas bacteria form this powerful symbiotic feedback loop. Together, they physically and chemically transform a toxic, barren expanse of alkaline dirt into a fertile, nutrient-dense, hospitable oasis.
It's incredible teamwork.
Okay, so if the Coprinus comatus can completely overhaul toxic, salty soil, neutralize osmotic stress, and build these complex, terraforming bacterial alliances, what happens when it encounters something even more dangerous than natural salt?
That's the million-dollar question.
What happens when this organism hits a toxic, human-made industrial spill? Because that exact scenario brings us to our final area of exploration, the fungal vacuum cleaner.
This is where we transition from natural ecological observation into the applied science of mycoremediation, supported by the laboratory studies on heavy metal bioaccumulation.
Right. We established right at the beginning that shaggy manes are edge species that love disturbed, highly compacted environments. Roadsides, gravel parking lots, driveways, dirt piles near urban construction sites.
All the places we find them.
And the unfortunate reality of the modern human world is that those exact disturbed environments are frequently saturated with heavy metals. They are polluted with decades of leaded car exhaust, industrial chemical runoff, and decomposing trash.
Which is exactly what prompted environmental researchers to conduct controlled laboratory studies.
Right.
They needed to observe exactly how this specific, resilient mushroom reacts when forced to grow in the presence of highly toxic elements.
What did they do?
They designed an experiment to test the growth response of Coprinus comatus mycelium against 4 distinct dangerous heavy metals: lead, copper, chromium, and cadmium.
They took the fungal tissue and grew it in petri dishes on a potato sucrose glutamine medium, which is basically a nutrient-rich gelatin, right?
Yes.
And they intentionally laced that gelatin with these 4 heavy metal poisons. And reading the setup for this, my immediate thought was, how much raw poison can a mushroom absorb before its cells just collapse and it dies?
The initial phase of the experiment yielded highly counterintuitive results, actually.
Okay, how so?
The researchers started by dosing the nutrient medium with very low concentrations of the heavy metals, specifically 1 part per million, or 1 ppm. At that trace level, all 4 of these toxic heavy metals actually stimulated the mycelial growth.
Wait, what?
Yeah, the fungal network grew faster, denser, and wider across the petri dish than the control group did in a completely clean, heavy metal-free environment.
Wait, injecting a little bit of lead and cadmium into the food supply actually made the fungus grow stronger.
In those specific microscopic trace amounts, yes. We have to remember that biological systems are complex. Certain transition metals, like copper and even chromium in specific valences, are nutritionally essential trace elements.
Okay, I guess we need tiny amounts of some metals, too.
Right. The fungus requires microscopic amounts of them to synthesize enzymes and facilitate metabolic pathways. At 1 ppm, the fungus eagerly utilized the trace metals as metabolic fuel.
But 1 ppm isn't an industrial spill. That's a tiny trace. So the researchers cranked the dial up to see where the breaking point was, right? They hit the developing mushrooms with a massive 100 ppm concentration of these heavy metals.
They did.
What did the biology do under that level of toxic stress?
At 1 ppm, the severe cellular toxicity became glaringly apparent. The high concentration of heavy metals severely disrupted the organism's biological clock. It significantly delayed the development of the primordia, which is the tiny initial knot of tissue that eventually becomes the mushroom.
So it slowed it down.
And it pushed back the overall fruiting body development timeline.
And looking at the data, one metal emerged as the clear villain of the story, doing far more damage than the others.
Yes.
Cadmium.
Cadmium. Cadmium proved to be the most acutely toxic and disruptive to the fungus. At a 1 ppm, the cadmium exposure drastically stunted the physical spread of the organism. It reduced the physical diameter of the mycelial growth down to a mere 20.75 millimeters, and it severely delayed the actual fruiting process, pushing it back to 17 days.
Wow. For a fast-growing, rapid-response species like the shaggy mane, 17 days is an absolute eternity. It was chemically battered and severely stunted.
We're really struggling.
But here is the most critical part of that experiment. Despite being poisoned, despite its growth being restricted to around 20 millimeters, and despite being delayed by weeks, the mushroom did not die.
It did not.
It still grew. It still managed to push up a fruiting body. So the researchers set up a second, even more extreme experiment to figure out what the mushroom was actually doing with those metals while it was growing.
For the second phase, they moved away from the gelatin petri dishes. They created a physical substrate mimicking real-world debris, mixing rice, straw, and sawdust. Then, they heavily contaminated this simulated soil, infusing it with a massive, highly toxic 1,000 ppm concentration of the heavy metals.
But 1,000 ppm, that is huge.
They introduced the shaggy mane, allowed it to grow under these extreme conditions, and then they harvested the mature fruiting bodies, the exact white, fluffy cylinders that a human forager would pick and eat.
And they took those harvested mushrooms and ran a complete chemical analysis on the flesh itself. This is where the biological data intersects with a massive blaring siren for anyone who likes to forage.
Absolutely.
The data showed that the mushroom physically pulled the heavy metals out of the contaminated sawdust and packed the toxins directly into its own fleshy body.
Like a sponge.
Yeah. Copper accumulated in the mushroom tissue at 16.78 ppm. Chromium hit 15.17 ppm. Lead was absorbed at 15.13 ppm, and the highly toxic cadmium accumulated in the edible flesh at 10.83 ppm.
The cellular mechanics behind this bioaccumulation are just fascinating. The fungus isn't just passively soaking up contaminated water like a paper towel.
What is it doing?
It actively targets and absorbs these metal ions through a complex ion exchange mechanism located on the vast microscopic surface area of its underground mycelium. The fungal cell walls basically swap harmless ions for the heavy metal ions.
It's actively trading for the poison.
Yes. And once absorbed into the fungal network, the organism transports these heavy metals away from the delicate growing tips and aggressively locks them away inside specialized, localized cellular storage units called vacuoles.
Oh, so it isolates the threat. It's essentially locking the toxic heavy metals in microscopic solitary confinement within its own cells, pulling them out of the environment to protect itself.
That's a great way to put it.
But I want to connect this biological superpower directly back to the reality of the listener. If you are out walking and you see a gorgeous, pristine, perfect cluster of shaggy manes growing on the side of a busy, exhaust-stained highway, or popping up near the chemically treated wood of an old train track, aren't you essentially just looking at a biological sponge that is completely saturated with lead and cadmium?
I cannot state this emphatically enough.
Yeah.
Yes. This specific bioaccumulative superpower is the exact reason why every single reputable foraging guide includes a strict non-negotiable warning against picking shaggy manes near railways, busy roadways, or industrial areas.
It's just too dangerous.
Because of their incredible active ability to pull toxins from the soil and concentrate them in the vacuoles of their fruiting bodies, eating a roadside shaggy mane is a direct, highly efficient route to heavy metal poisoning.
Right. By eating it, you are bypassing the protective barrier of the soil and putting those concentrated industrial toxins directly into your own digestive tract. The very superpower that makes them amazing survivors makes them incredibly dangerous for us to eat if we aren't highly vigilant about where we pick them.
Location is everything.
But if we step back from the culinary danger and look at the bigger picture, we can flip that danger on its head and arrive at an incredible environmental benefit.
The application of this science is called mycoremediation.
Right, mycoremediation.
Yes. The term breaks down simply. Myco meaning fungus, and remedium meaning restoring balance or healing.
Let's synthesize everything we've learned and paint the picture of what this organism is actually capable of. You have a mushroom that is naturally an edge species, meaning its preferred habitat is the roughest, most compacted, physically disturbed dirt on Earth.
It thrives there.
It generates so much internal hydraulic turgor pressure that its soft flesh can easily heave and shatter solid concrete to reach the surface. It pumps powerful extracellular chemical scissors into the soil to unlock a 600% increase in bioavailable potassium and double the available nitrogen.
A literal fertilizer factory.
It cultivates an aggressive army of Pseudomonas bacteria to survive lethal salt levels and pull nitrogen fertilizer from the air. And, as we just learned, it actively vacuums up lead, copper, chromium, and cadmium through ion exchange, locking those industrial poisons safely inside its own cap.
When you synthesize all of those distinct biological traits, you realize you are not looking at a simple fungus. You are looking at a highly evolved, prime biological candidate for rehabilitating the Earth's most toxic, devastated landscapes.
We could literally deploy these mushrooms as biological cleanup crews to abandoned mining sites, heavy chemical spills, or polluted, barren urban wastelands.
That is the ultimate goal of mycoremediation. You intentionally introduce the mycelium of Coprinus comatus to a devastated landscape where no plant life can survive.
And then what?
The fungal network spreads. It physically breaks up and aerates the compacted dead soil using that turgor pressure. It actively absorbs the toxic heavy metals, pulling them out of the dirt and concentrating them up above ground into its fruiting bodies.
Which human cleanup crews would then come through and harvest? We pick the toxic mushrooms and safely dispose of them in a contained hazardous waste facility, effectively and physically removing the heavy metals from the environment entirely.
Precisely. The heavy metals are extracted. And look at what the shaggy mane leaves behind in its wake.
It leaves behind soil that has been structurally repaired and aerated. It leaves behind soil stripped of its lethal heavy metals. It leaves behind soil whose electrical conductivity and salt stress have been neutralized.
It's practically a clean slate.
And it leaves behind dirt packed to the absolute brim with bioavailable nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, and a thriving, resilient colony of stress-tolerant Pseudomonas bacteria. It essentially builds the perfect fertile runway for new plant life, grasses, and trees to finally take root in a place that was previously dead and toxic.
It is profound ecological engineering. The shaggy mane is literally eating pollution, processing it, and excreting fertility.
So let's bring this entire journey full circle. We started this deep dive by looking at a weird, shaggy white cylinder poking out of a suburban lawn after a rainstorm. But what we've discovered is that the Coprinus comatus is so much more than a bizarre lawn ornament.
It operates as a masterclass in extraordinary biological contradictions.
It's a delicate, fluffy, water-filled organism that shatters concrete. It's an innocent-looking stationary organism that actively sets chemical traps to hunt, paralyze, and digest microscopic worms.
That's still so wild to me.
It's a highly prized, elite culinary delicacy that requires you to race against a biological ticking clock, utilizing cold water oxygen deprivation just to prevent it from turning into George Washington's writing ink.
It's a chemical mastermind that expertly navigates complex enzymatic pathways, proving its complete safety while its visually identical cousin deploys aminocyclopropanol to block aldehyde dehydrogenase, creating weaponized hangovers in unsuspecting foragers.
And on a planetary scale, it is an underground ecological architect. It farms beneficial wasteland bacteria, neutralizes salt, and acts as a biological vacuum cleaner using ion exchange to pull lead and cadmium out of our most chemically polluted soils.
It's a busy mushroom.
The next time you see one of these fluffy lawyer's wigs rising from the dirt or cracking through the asphalt of your driveway, I want you to take a second and appreciate the immense microscopic warfare, the complex chemistry, and the profound environmental healing that is happening right beneath your feet.
Just remember, if you plan to appreciate its culinary qualities instead of its ecological ones, you'd better have your frying pan hot, buttered, and ready the exact second you pick it.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up this deep dive, my research into the biology of this organism left me with one final, deeply provocative thought that I want to pass on to you to mull over.
I like a good provocative thought.
It goes back to that wild concept of autodeliquescence, the melting act. Think about the mechanics of it. The shaggy mane intentionally and systematically breaks down its own physical structure.
Right.
It synthesizes chitinase to destroy its own structural chitin scaffolding, dissolving itself right down to the molecular level. And it does this at the exact moment its core biological purpose, spreading its spores to the wind and attracting the flies, is fulfilled.
Its job is done.
It achieves its life goal and immediately initiates a process that leaves absolutely no trace of its physical structure behind, returning its components safely and organically to the earth.
It is the ultimate natural expression of planned obsolescence, but executed in a biologically perfect, zero-waste, closed-loop system.
Exactly. So here's the question I want to leave you with. What if human engineering, our architecture, or our technology took a direct cue from the shaggy mane? Imagine a world where our built environment operated on fungal logic.
Wow.
What if our buildings, our single-use plastics, our smartphones, or our electronics were intentionally designed with a molecular deliquescence trigger built into their foundations?
That would change everything.
Imagine if human technology was engineered to safely, cleanly melt down and recycle itself back into harmless base elements the very moment its usefulness expired. Rather than sitting in sprawling landfills for centuries, slowly leaching the exact same heavy metals that the shaggy mane is currently trying to clean up for us, just imagine what a truly sustainable world, built on the logic of a melting mushroom, would look like.